Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. Today I'm out in the garden and I have lots of seeds to plant out in the garden today. So I'm going to be direct sowing lots of vegetables and I thought you might want to join me in the garden today. Now as you can see, it's really bright out. It's pretty much the middle of the day right now, which is not the ideal time to film a video, but it's the time that I had free to get this done. So I figured rather than not having a video, we would just have a little bit of a bright video today. So today I'm going to, as I said, be direct sowing a few things. So I have here my box of bush beans. I have lettuce. I'm not sure if I'm going to sow any lettuce or not, but we might do a little bit of that. I do like to, as the season goes on, continuously sow new lettuce seed, kind of in between my other larger crops where they will give it a little bit of shade and help it last a little longer in the summer. So lettuce is a great crop for succession sowing, so I brought that out in case we decide to do some of that. Carrots, same thing, I may try to sow some carrots. I definitely do want to get some summer squash planted, so I brought that out, and also my pole beans. So that's what I have planned for today. I may end up grabbing some more seeds from my house for some flowers or companion plants, but we'll kind of just get planting and see how the day goes. So I'm doing a little bit of an experiment with my summer squash this year, but the main place I have reserved for summer squash is this first bed when you first walk into the garden. You can see I have a couple tomatoes growing on the end there, and this other part of the fence here will end up having cucumbers as well as this arched trellis. I'm also planting cucumbers on there. But here in these big flat parts, I'm going to plant some summer squash and zucchini. Now, when it comes to planting the vegetable garden, I don't plan everything out in a real lot of detail. Basically, what I do is I plan out my main things. Like I knew I wanted to have 3 tomatoes along this bed. I knew I wanted to have some zucchinis and some cucumbers in this bed as well. But I didn't plan out exactly where everything was going to go. And usually what I kind of do is I plan, for example, where I'm going to put my tomatoes, my squash, the really big crops. Then I sort of fill in any extra spaces with a lot of herbs and companion plants, with a lot of flowers, and also smaller vegetables like lettuce, carrots. So a lot of my garden kind of gets planned on the fly. As I said, I have a rough overall plan and then kind of fill in the details as I go. So you can see I've got the tomatoes here, and I am planning to put a zucchini right here. But once I had that planned out, I kind of plugged in some random companion plants in other spots. I've got alyssum, you can see calendula, that's a baby chamomile, zinnia. So I am kind of doing a lot of this on the fly. So I find that experimenting in the garden, not really having a specific plan and kind of figuring some things out as I go, I think that I learn a lot about gardening that way. I learn a lot about how plants grow. Now, you can definitely plan everything out. If you want to graph everything out and make a design of exactly what companion plants are going to go where, and that is what works well for you, then that's a great option too. I find that even if I try to do that, a lot of times I have some seeds that don't come up, some seeds that do, plants that do well and others that don't. And so even if I make a really detailed plan like that, I find that a lot of times I'm not able to stick to it completely because you just can't always predict what's going to happen in the garden. So I think for me at least, a little bit of flexibility works pretty well. And sometimes you'll find a combination of plants that work really well together. And when that happens, I do intentionally plant those together in the future. But for the most part, we're just gonna kind of wing it here. So one thing I am experimenting with a little bit is companion planting summer squash and tomatoes. Now those are both really large vegetables, but they grow very differently. You can see these tomatoes are growing on the trellis. These are going to eventually be very tall. And if I plant a zucchini here, it's going to spread out and be large, but it's not going to be really tall. And I think that that difference in growth habit has the potential to make them really good companion planting partners because they grow differently, and I think they're both really going to help each other. Especially the zucchini has really large leaves, takes up a large amount of the ground. It really shades out the ground, and it's going to kind of act, if all goes well, it's going to kind of act as a living mulch. So that's my plan for that. So because I'm trying that this year, I actually, in my dedicated tomato beds, I actually already planted a couple seeds for zucchinis to kind of grow in front of the tomatoes. So I'll definitely keep you updated about how well that works. My one concern about that is that with the tomatoes getting so tall, I'm not sure if they're going to shade out the zucchini and cause the zucchini to not do as well. But again, I'll keep you updated about that as the season goes on and let you know if this is a success or a fail. So for now, let's choose a zucchini variety to put in this bed here. So in this bed here, I'm planning to grow 4 zucchini plants. I'm planning on the zucchini plants taking up the majority of the actual ground space, and then I have some trellis plants like you saw my tomatoes. On the back half of the trellis, I'm planning to put cucumbers, which will also climb. So those shouldn't have a large footprint as far as taking up a lot of ground space. They will take a fair amount of resources, so we are going to need to make sure that we have really fertile soil and that we fertilize as needed. Now you can see I kind of have mixed in some flowers and herbs along with these other plants. Those will be really important for things like drawing in pollinators, and they'll also be really useful for drawing in beneficial insects, which might attack any pests that choose to prey on my plants. Now, attracting pollinators is really important when you're planting squash. Squash relies heavily on insect pollination to produce a fruit for you. Tomatoes are pretty self-pollinating. It doesn't really take much to pollinate a tomato plant. But zucchini and really all squash has male flowers and female flowers, which means that pollen has to travel from the male flower to the female flower, and if that doesn't happen, you will not get a squash. So because of that, pollination is really important when it comes to squash. So I think by planting a lot of these flowers or a lot of these plants that have really showy flowers, I have zinnias, I have cosmos over here, those will help bring in pollinators and hopefully will ensure a better squash crop for us. So I have a few varieties of zucchini that I'm planning on planting over here. One is the Coquezel zucchini. I have grown this in the past and I do really like it. I actually did not have it in my garden last year and I kind of missed it. So I made sure to get seeds for it this year. So I'll be doing 1 Coquezel plant, and I'm also planning on trying for the first time this long white of Palermo zucchini. It just looks like a really nice zucchini, and it almost looks to me like a Lebanese kusa squash. They're similar to zucchini, but they have a little bit, I don't really know how to describe the flavor. They're slightly different than zucchini, and I actually prefer them. And while this is listed as a zucchini, it looks really similar to me, so I figured that would be worth a try. I also want to try, now this I think is not actually considered a zucchini, Rugosa friulana. I have no idea if I pronounced that right. I might have completely butchered it, but it looked really fun and I wanted to give it a try. The description sounded really good. And while I'm not as big of a fan of yellow crookneck summer squash, my daughter really likes them. So if this ends up tasting more like that, then this will be something that she can enjoy. I think I'm also going to plant one of this white bush Lebanese squash. This is a type of squash, like I was mentioning before, a Lebanese kusa squash. This is an open pollinated variety, which means that I would be able to save seeds from it as long as I let a fruit go on the plant to maturity. I'm not sure if I'll end up doing that or not, but it's nice to have the option. So we have these 4 varieties. I'm going to go ahead and get these planted in this bed. So you can see I have a nasturtium growing here, and there's actually a tiny seedling there. I don't know if you can even see it, but I am experimenting with growing nasturtiums at the base of my squash this year. I have no idea if there's any truth to it or not, but I have heard that nasturtiums are good at repelling the squash vine borer. So I figured they're certainly not going to hurt anything. They'll most likely attract pollinators, so we'll give it a try. So here I'm going to plant 2 seeds for this Rugosa friulana summer squash. So I changed my mind. I'm actually going to plant 3 seeds here, because what I want is actually for 2 plants to grow together, basically as 1 plant. As I mentioned, for your squash to get pollinated, you need to have male and female flowers together blooming at the same time. And I find that that's more likely to happen if you have 2 plants. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant 3 seeds, and that way if one doesn't germinate, I'll still have 2. If all 3 of them germinate, I will choose the 2 strongest plants and pull out the weaker one. So I'm just going to go ahead and get these planted. The seed packet says to plant these between 1/2 and 1 inch deep. So I'm going to go with about 1 inch deep because it's been a little dry and I think they're more likely to germinate if I plant them slightly deeper. So I'm just going to go ahead and basically plant these in a little bit of a triangle here. So there, we've got the Rugosa friulana summer squash plant. So on this side of the bed over here, I think I'm going to plant the white bush Lebanese squash. So when you're planting squash, whether it's summer squash or winter squash, you want to make sure that you are definitely past your last frost date. Squash is extremely frost tender, and if there's any frost, it will kill your plant. Even if you get cold nights, squash really does not like cold nights, so technically I am probably planting this slightly early. We should be past our last frost, but we probably will still have a few nights in the 40s, which the squash won't be a big fan of. But after the next couple nights, all of our nights are forecasted to be in the 50s, and this squash won't be germinating until after those cooler nights are past. So I'm going to go ahead and plant these. Absolute worst case scenario, if they don't do well, I have lots of extra seeds, so I can always start some new ones. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to plant 3 seeds together, and then I'm going to go ahead and thin out the weakest seedling if all 3 of them germinate. Now again, here you can see I have some nasturtium seedlings. I actually started these, I'm not sure how long ago. I started them a little while ago, and they've just germinated a couple days ago. So these are hopefully going to make some nice companion plants for my zucchini here. So we're going to go ahead and get those planted. All right, so that's the area where we planted. We're going to go on over to the other side of this trellis here. And in this side of the bed, I'm going to plant 2 more zucchini plants. So on this side of the trellis here, this is where the cucumbers will be climbing. I'm going to be planting my cocozelle seeds. Now, I will say part of the reason I'm being pretty precise about telling you guys exactly where I'm planting this is because I'm going to go back to this video and I'm going to use this for my garden notes. When seeds start germinating and I want to know what's what, I'll be able to refer back to this and know what I planted where. And that way, if I have a certain variety that doesn't germinate, I'll know which variety I need to replant and which ones did germinate. So same thing with this one. I am going to go ahead and plant 3 of these seeds on this side of the bed over here. So over on this side of the bed, you can see this is the back of where the tomatoes are. I've got some nasturtiums again here that came up. Over there you can see I've got some basil, I've got some calendula, zinnias, alyssum, all kinds of nice companion plants that should make for a really beautiful garden. So I will say, I do plant companion plants partly because they add so much practical value to the garden. They're great for attracting pollinators, they're great for just promoting biodiversity, for attracting beneficial insects. I also really plant them just because I think it makes the garden beautiful. And if you find your garden a beautiful place, it's going to be somewhere that you're going to spend more time, and you're going to find that it feeds more than just your body. I find that if your garden is somewhere that you really want to be, you're naturally going to be more successful because you're going to spend time there, and it's going to be something that you're emotionally invested in rather than just depending on for a harvest. And so honestly, the reasons to plant flowers and herbs and just to make a beautiful garden, the reasons are really just limitless. So all that being said, over here on the back side of the tomatoes, we are going to be planting our long white of Palermo zucchini plant. So once again, I'm going to just stick 3 seeds about 1 inch or so in the ground, and I just poured out way more seeds than I need. So let me grab 3 of these and put the others back. So we're going to go ahead and get these planted right over here. So since I'm not expecting any significant rain in the next few days, I'm also going to go ahead and water these seeds in, and hopefully that will give us a little boost on germination. So when it comes to bush beans, those are one of the vegetables that I don't really plan a specific place for in the garden because honestly they don't take up a ton of space. Each individual plant doesn't take up a ton of space, and so they're really easy to just kind of stick in between all your other plants. So basically what I'm going to do is where I just planted these zucchinis, I'm just going to pop a few bush beans in. It's kind of in between where the zucchinis are and the other plants are. We're just going to let them come up and see what we get for harvest. So here I have some purple teepee bush beans. I have not actually grown this variety before. I have grown purple beans in the past, but I think they've usually been Royal Burgundy. This year I grabbed Royal Teepee, so we're going to give these a try and we are going to see how they do. I think that purple beans are really pretty. See how deep and purple they are, plus the flowers being that pinkish purple are really pretty as well. Of course, the downside to purple beans is that they do turn green when you cook them. So for that reason, I usually like to either undercook them a little bit so they still have a little hint of that purple left, or else I just like to leave them raw and put them in a salad. Or you can just cook them and they'll just turn into green beans. But either way, they're really pretty growing in the garden. So as I said, I don't usually plant a whole patch of bush beans. I just kind of stick a few in the ground here and there. So they don't need to be spaced apart too far. I think they say between, come back here. I think they say between 4 and 6 inches apart. I usually, of course, you know me, I usually go more towards the side of 4 inches. So we're just going to do a couple little rows here. Now, I don't know if it really matters or not, but you see one side of the bean has this little divot on it. Some people call it the eye. I always plant that facing down. I just heard when I first started gardening that that was the correct way to sow bean seeds, and honestly, I have no idea if it makes a difference or not, but I still do it that way, and it definitely doesn't hurt anything. So I do have a few other bush bean varieties that I'm planning to sprinkle at some point somewhere in my garden, but I think I'm actually going to hold off on planting the rest of these for today because I want to wait until some of my other seeds germinate and see where I have spaces. So you can see there's my kind of fly by the seat of my pants type of planting. Now, incidentally though, bush beans are also a great crop for succession sowing. They mature pretty quickly and they don't take up a lot of space, so you can easily get several harvests of bush beans throughout the year. So they're a great plant to kind of plant wherever you have space and also to plant as you take other plants out. So I have this, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. This is a yellow bush bean. I have Provider green bush beans, which is, you know, basically the classic green bean. I have these. I have not tried this before. This is Maxabel, and this is supposed to be a really slender bean. It's supposed to be very tender and delicious. Red Swan bush beans, which I did grow last year for the first time. I did really like them. They're definitely, as you can see, a really unique color. They were really beautiful, and the flowers were really beautiful. I did find with these, just a couple words of caution if you're thinking about growing these, they are listed as bush beans, and they didn't climb as much as my pole beans, but they did definitely want to climb. They sent off some runners, and actually last year I ended up planting them in this bed, kind of in front of my tomatoes, and they went back and actually ended up climbing that trellis. So it worked out well for them that the trellis was there. But these do like to climb. They were delicious, but I found that they didn't stay tender as long as a lot of the other bean varieties. So if you grow them, just know you want to make sure that you harvest these right away rather than letting them get larger. So as I said, I'm going to hold off on the rest of these for now. We got our purple teepee bush beans planted, and I'm going to find space for these others as the season goes on. We will find a space for them definitely. So because I'm actually running a little short on time today, I'm going to hold off on planting the pole beans. I'll do that over the next couple days. But I'll just show you guys what varieties I'm going to plant and where I'm going to plant them. So in this garden here, I'm planning to plant some Vortex pole beans. This is, well, you know, I have a couple favorites. This is one of my favorite pole beans. This is a solid green, rounded bean. It's really delicious. It stays really tender for quite a long time, so I like it. I also have the rattlesnake pole bean. This one is my other favorite, I would say. This is a little more of a flattened bean. It's green with purple streaks, so it's really beautiful. Now, again, kind of like solid purple beans, the purple streaks will disappear when you cook it, but it's still really delicious. And the final pole bean that I'm going to plant in this garden over here is the purple potted pole bean. I always like to have some color variety, and this, unsurprisingly, is a purple bean. So I find that these 3 beans, by planting these varieties, it gives me, obviously, a beautiful variety of color, especially when you add in the colors from the bush beans. You know, we have more purple there, we have green, I have some yellow and some red. So especially when we have some of those all ready to harvest at the same time, it makes for a beautiful variety. I also find that while these do definitely have some overlap in harvest windows, they have a little bit different maturity dates, and so I find that it does really extend the harvest by planting a variety of types. So these are the beans that I'm going to plant, and I will show you which trellises I'm going to be planting them on. So this first trellis here, when you first enter the garden, as I mentioned before, this is going to have cucumbers on it, but this middle trellis and the back one will both have pole beans growing on them. I haven't decided which varieties are going to grow where yet, but they'll be on both sides of this trellis here. So when it comes time to plant these pole beans, which I will most likely do in the next day or two, I'm going to basically plant them the same way I planted the bush beans. I just stick them about 1 inch deep in the dirt and spread them out, you know, maybe 4 or 6 inches from each other. The only difference is that these need something to climb. So I will be planting them along the poles of the trellis. You know, actually, I think what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to plant 3 seeds along basically each spike from the trellis, and depending on how I feel, we'll see. I may end up thinning it to 2 plants per wire, but I may end up leaving 3. We'll see. We'll see how the year goes. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'll be getting that done in the next couple days. So I definitely need to go ahead and water those zucchinis and those bush beans that I planted. I did also end up planting a few carrots along my dedicated tomato beds, which I didn't end up showing you guys, but I will definitely show you those in a garden tour once they start germinating. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me in the garden today. Thank you for planting with me, and I am curious if you could let me know in the comments, how do you approach garden planning? Do you approach it kind of like me, where you plan the big things and then kind of stick other stuff wherever you go? Do you have no plan at all and just plant things wherever you feel like it? Or do you plan every little plant out? I'm just curious how different people approach garden planning, because I know gardening is a very, very individual hobby, I guess. And it's just interesting to really just to see people's different processes. So I'd love to hear how you approach it. So I hope you guys are having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.